The church cemetery encounter. This is a personal experience I had several years back in either 2015 or 2016. At the time, I was working as a second shift mechanic at a trucking company 30 miles from where I lived. I became good friends with one of the mechanics on my shift, and we would often hang out after the shift ended. We both lived in the same town and would usually grab a case of beer on the way home since gas stations were still open close to midnight. There was a spot in the woods behind my house that I had turned into a fire pit, and on most occasions he would follow me home so we could drink there and not worry about bothering anybody in the late hour. One night after we punched off the time clock, we agreed to hang out like any other night, but this time he couldn't follow me home. I don't remember the reason since it was a while ago, but instead he could meet me at the church up the road from my house. I purchased the beer, get to the church parking lot and wait for him to arrive. Now some time passes and he is nowhere to be seen, so I figured I'd get out of my car and watch the road looking for headlights. I finally see his truck pull into the lot, and he pulls up beside my car, which I'm leaning against. We decide to hang out at the church for a bit before we depart to my place, both of us leaning against our vehicles facing the headstones. Now things get weird. We're talking and then he cuts me off mid-sentence and says, "Do you see that?" "See what?" I said. He said he saw movement and points to a headstone several rows up from the curb of the parking lot. I focused in that direction for a moment, but honestly couldn't see whatever he had saw. He seemed very taken back by it, and I could tell he wasn't joking by his expression. I asked him what exactly it was he had seen, in which he replied, a dark shadow rocking back and forth. Whether I believed him fully or not, hearing his description gave me cold chills. I asked if he had a means of defense, and he showed the 9mm on his hip. Even still, he was in no way ready to walk up there and investigate the headstone. I decided to check it out and cross the pavement and onto the grass. Now this church is pretty well lit by a half-dozen light poles, and the only shadows that were cast were by the headstones themselves. I start looking around on the third row and I'm instantly hit with dread. About 15 feet in front of me is a pitch-black figure sitting against one of the stones. Its head was between its knees and was rocking steadily back and forth, exactly as my buddy described. How he could have saw it from the car, I do not know. But even worse to think about was that I had been alone with this thing unnoticed the entire time. I ask if he or she is all right and get no response, only a faint whimpering, as if it was mourning the loss of whoever was buried at the grave. I figured grave visitations wasn't unusual, but at midnight, that's fucking eerie. I walk closer to the figure until I am standing 3 feet from it and was going to speak out again until my blood runs absolutely cold. There is light illuminating onto the figure and somewhat of the surrounding ground, and unlike anything I have ever seen, the light seemed to just absorb into the blackness of the figure. I could see no defining features, couldn't make out shoes, hair or hat, separation of clothing telling me this was a human being in my presence. The whimpering turned into louder, aggressive moans, and somehow keeping my military composure, I backed away slowly, then ran down to my buddy and told him we needed to get the hell out of there immediately. And we did. About an hour later, we returned to the cemetery, but the figure was gone. We are no longer friends, but I still like to tell this story since it's my only real experience I've had of this kind. Still to this day, I have no idea what it was we saw that night.